Good evening and welcome to Addressing the Issue with me, Andy Streisfeld. Hope you're having a great day. So we are now on episode 3, of 3 of the discussion of Canadian identity. Are we losing our Canadianness? We tackled it with Dr. Alistair Edgar. We talked about peacekeeping and peacemaking. We spoke with Paul Aiken, who was the co-writer and producer for Murdoch Mysteries, and we talked about how Canada is portrayed in culture, such as TV and movies. And now we move to the world of sports. There's no doubt about it that Canada has rivalries, not just in hockey, but in a lot of sports. And if we listen to a lot of our contemporaries in the media, it becomes more and more evident that somehow we're doing something right and we're going against the grain when it comes to other nationalities in international sports. And today we're going to talk about Canada's role in international sports and how we as Canadians feel about the Canadian identity in sports. With me now, remotely, is Mandy Bujold. Let me get this right. I wrote this down on paper. 11-time Canadian National Championship, 3 Continental Championships, gold medal at the Pan Am Games, bronze at the Commonwealth Games, an Olympian. Congratulations, you are now an honorary PhD at Laurier, and you made it big in this world as the owner of the Golden Bujold Burger at the Works in Kitchener-Waterloo. With us right now is Mandy. Mandy, how are you?
Good, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. And I'll tell you that last tidbit, among the fact that you are an international ambassador for Canada in sports, is the pinnacle of what I think. You make it when you're ambassador, and you make it when they name a meal out of you. So thank you very much. So getting straight to it, let's talk about you. Definitely, you have represented Canada in various different fields, in various different arenas of the world. And let's get straight at it. How does it feel to represent Canada, and what can you say about Canada in the world of boxing?
I mean, to represent your country on the international stage it's a pretty amazing feeling, and I think that's, part of the pride of why you do it. I'm sure we'll probably talk about it, but there's not a lot of funding in Canadian sports. So I think athletes that are representing Canada are doing it because they love it. So I think there's no better feeling than being out there competing, knowing that you're representing not only your city, your province, but your entire country. There's just a sense of pride that comes along with that.
So when you're out there being an ambassador, being an athlete, being a representative of Canada both in and out of the ring, what do people expect from a Canadian? What are they looking for as opposed to a Brit or a Frenchman or an American or a Russian?
You know what? I think yeah, people definitely expect us to be nice, which is funny, right? Because people look at boxing, for example, as like an aggressive sport, especially people who don't know the sport very well. So usually they're pretty surprised when you say like, "Oh, I'm a boxer," but you're also Canadian, so you have that I'm kind of nice, and then I gotta switch to a new gear when I step into the ring, because obviously you don't want to be nice to your opponent. But you know what? I've actually been able to use that to my advantage sometimes, where it's I think people are going to, assume that, hey, I'm going to be nice. I'm going to be that person that just kind of maybe respects someone a little bit too much in the ring or whatever. And, when you go to the opposite of that, I think you can actually surprise some people.
So a lot of your contemporaries in other sports, besides hockey, basketball, even in wrestling, I've been reading up in preparation for this interview, talk about the international rivalry between Canada and the United States, because that's the healthy relationship that we have with the Americans. But elsewhere in the world, we have these rivalries. Is there really a rivalry in boxing?
Yeah, I mean, I would say for sure, if let's say we're going at the continental level, where like a Pan Am Games or something like that, obviously the US is usually the number one competition. And that's where you'll see kind of that rivalry. Sometimes it really depends, like in boxing, from division to division, right? So for me, I did US was always my biggest competition. So I did have that rivalry. I know exactly what that feels like. And yeah, so I think it does vary a little bit, but yeah, the US is always, I mean, you look at them, there's one event, for example, that sticks out in my mind. I remember going to a world championship. It was over in Korea. I had to basically do like a crowdfunding, you know, page to like get myself there. I step into the ring and with an American opponent who I know is representing, CoverGirl, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, whatever, right? Like every big brand you can imagine. And like, so not only is it like a rivalry in terms of competition, but it's also like, well, like they seem to get so many more opportunities than the Canadian athletes when we're doing the exact same thing. So obviously that adds, I think, a little bit of the frustration when you're competing against them.
So this is a recurring theme among all athletes who are here in Canada, and in some sports, I guess the term is that a lot of athletes could be poached by the Americans or other countries. So the question here is, poaching is usually a sign of you're not able to sustain something, so somebody comes and takes it from you. But if you are strong enough to sustain it, then people wouldn't take your stuff, wouldn't poach. So in the case of Canadian boxing, I guess the question here is that as part of the national narrative that we're trying to talk about here, and we address the issue of us not keeping our Canadianism because we're talking about a lot of the time foreign intervention. We're talking about countries taking from us, whatever it is. So I'll come back to boxing with you and ask about your thoughts on the fact that because we are underfunded, because probably your sport is suffering like other sports, are we losing Canadian resources because of that? And what would you recommend that we do to address this issue to build up that thing again?
Right. So I'd say like my answer is probably twofold. So on the Olympic side of things, sometimes you'll actually see athletes that maybe they can't make the Canadian national team, but they have a citizenship with another country. So they'll actually make that decision to go because they're like, well, I can't make the national team. I'm going to try for one of these other countries that maybe it's a little bit of an easier pathway. Or maybe there's a bit more support, maybe there's better coaching. They're kind of looking for something a little bit more, usually when they're going that way. On the professional side, though, I think that you definitely see a lot more poaching because there's not a lot of like big promoters. They're not giving the big opportunities. So unless it's like you're really stuck on like wanting to live in, your city in Toronto or Montreal or whatever it might be, and like have your major fights there, you're usually going to go over to the US, or people are going to, if you're really good, you're going to get calls from, some of the big promoters in the US to bring you over to, Vegas, California, Texas, whatever it might be. So I think there's a bit of a mix there on why people are leaving.
All right. We're going to take a commercial break and be back with Mandy Bujold in just after these messages. All right, welcome back to Addressing the Issue. I'm here with Mandy Bujold. All right, so we've talked about, or we started to address the issue of this Canadianness. So I'm going to take you back to my childhood for a moment. I was born and raised in Montreal, 6 years old when the Olympics came. Many funny stories because my parents were of Romanian descent. You have been trained by a Romanian boxing legend, actually. And I come now to the discussion of what is the demand on a Canadian athlete? And I'll take it in a couple of questions or a couple of statements, and I'll say that one of the things that I remember being a young man attending CEGEP University in Montreal was that every time there was a political issue, like separatism, and there was this unifying force that every time there was an Olympics and a Canadian did well, it brought the room together. French and English, it unified the country. And for that day, week, and possibly for a month, a lot of that political crap, if we call it, went away. So talk to me about the power of sports. Talk to me about the power of Canadian sports in doing what I've just explained, this national unity thing and building pride for that period.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like, I think it's so important, as a whole, like sport is just so important, especially now, like for me, I have two young daughters and like my oldest is 5 and just starting to get her into sport, seeing, what they can get out of it, seeing that they can look up to a role model, doing a small competition, the pride that they get, the pride that everyone shares when they're like doing that together. So obviously, as you go higher in the international level, it just gets bigger, and there's more eyes, and there's more pride, and there's more like excitement around that. So I think it's huge. I mean, we saw, over the last Olympics, happened during COVID. The entire world was shut down. And then, it got postponed and we were there. The entire world still came together. Obviously, no one in the seats watching us, but it was still a pretty amazing moment to think that, like, wow, like, even though we're going through something that we're all kind of unsure of, especially at that time, like it was a little scary for everybody, that we were still able to come together and, it create some sort of good, some sort of excitement around sport. And I think sport just naturally brings people together.
All right. So some of your contemporaries, and I was doing some research on Player's Own Voice with Anastasia Buches, and she had a couple of your colleagues comment on this topic, and I want to bring it because I want the viewership to understand the trials and tribulations that you have to go through and athletes have to go through. You're done. You've fought your fight and you're leaving the ring. You now have to go through a media circus to get to your locker room, to then try to digest what has happened, to get to the international village where you can get a break. The needs of the country sometimes are too demanding on an athlete. I'd like you to talk about how the needs of the country at that moment and this thing that I just laid out for the crowd to what you have gone through possibly. How does it affect you, and how does it affect the idea that you are carrying the hope of a nation?
It's tough. Like, I don't know how else to really describe it. You definitely feel like, for me, in that, that last fight before Tokyo, where there was just so much support from people pouring in, like in the lead up to that, pushing me to keep fighting and to keep kind of going forward. I gave everything I could, and getting there, having that opportunity, you know, and then everything having to come together at the right time, for me, it just didn't. It was just too much at one moment. But you definitely felt everyone was watching. And I think, sometimes the media can be harsh. Sometimes it can be like, I see it all the time where they just, you say the wrong thing, or you don't know how to, like, what an athlete just went through mentally, physically, emotionally to get to that moment. And then there's just so much pressure. So I think they just need to be a little bit more like, um I don't know, like, considering what all those situations are, right? So
So let me take you in another direction now. All right. So now we'll talk about origin stories. We where it came from. Now, for me, growing up in Montreal, my dad being ethnic Romanian, the only thing that he really enjoyed watching was hockey, baseball, soccer. So we would watch the doubleheader in Hockey Night in Canada to the point where it now ends for the day. You have the O Canada montage, and you have now that patriotic moment where Greg Joy jumps at 1976 over the bar, and it becomes enshrined. More enshrined than Henderson's goal, more enshrined than any other Canadian athlete. And for me, I'm a softie. I cry at commercials. But I'm saying, what Olympic moment in your lifetime do you think encouraged you to be in sports and when you were an Olympian, to be an Olympian?
um like, I think for me it was always just kind of that climb that was exciting. Like, when I first started, I never thought I was going to go to the Olympics. I didn't grow up like in an athletic family. We watched hockey during the playoffs. That was probably like the extent of, what I was really exposed to. But really was for like more of a personal thing. Like, I just really wanted to, like, see what I could do. When the Olympics became an option for me, and 2012 was that first time, it was just like this amazing thing, because I had been to the Pan Am Games. I had been to like the highest level already, and it was like, okay, you just want to see what that next step looks like, and you kind of look at those Olympic rings. It just looks amazing. um and then attending my first Olympic Games was also just an incredible opportunity, right? Like, being there, brushing shoulders with someone like Serena Williams, who I've always looked up to, or seeing Michael Phelps, like in the same dining room. It was really cool to be like, okay, like, these are people I look up to, and now I'm kind of there, kind of on that level playing field. So that was pretty neat, and I think that's what motivated me, to keep going and to keep trying, to reach that goal.
So, behind the scenes, if you can let us in on some of the magic. So, more energy marching in or marching out?
Definitely on the way in.
And when we get to the cutscenes and we see everybody hugging, a Russian hugs an American and a Canadian hugs a Brit, really?
Well, yeah, so I would say like at the end of the games, like at the end of the day, like we're all competitors. Like competition when you're on your playing field, but other than that, like we're friends. Like I've had many international athletes from Italy, from Australia, from all over to come and actually just like stay at my house because I needed training or whatever. And it's like, you know what, we were able to do that. And then still, when it comes time for competition, you're a competitor, right? So I think you just have an appreciation. There's so much that you can connect on that, like, you could talk to any athlete in the world and like start talking about what your training's like, coaching, just what's happening like in that world. It's so easy to connect with people all over the world, even if you don't speak the same language. And I think that's what's pretty amazing from sport.
All right, we're going to take a commercial break here. We'll be back with Mandy Bujold after these messages. All right, welcome back to Addressing the Issue with me, Andy Streisfeld, Mandy Bujold, Olympian, on the remotely here. All right, so we were addressing national unity. We're addressing the Olympics, giving us a little bit of a glimpse behind the curtain, seeing things and understanding it. So when we watch, we understand. So let's come back to the issue that we're dealing with, which is Canada, and are we losing our Canadianness in such a way? And we talked about the history of Canada. We talked about everything that has gone, let's say, in the last 40 years, from 1976 Montreal Olympics all the way forward. We've had NAFTA agreements, we've had scandals in sports, scandals in politics, but there's always this civility. We know that we've been trying to invest more in sports. We know that a lot of Canadian athletes go to the United States or other countries. You address the issue of dual citizenship, and that explains for a lot of things. So now if we were going to advocate, and I'm not putting you in the advocating voice, I'm putting you to try to address the issue of Canadianness. What can we do in sport that we can try to turn back the dial a bit and say, look, let's go back to the old days. You know, yes, we used to play hockey in rinks in the backyard, but let's talk about what else we can do as Canadians to try to get some of that storied history that we talked about, Greg Joy, Henderson, and other Olympic moments that we had. So let's throw it back to you and let's get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think this is, I think, a big topic right now too, is like, especially with like women's sport, women's professional sport in Canada. I know that there's a lot of like an untapped market there because we're not maybe showing those sports on TV. So people are like, well, how do I become a fan if I don't get to see it? And how do I see it if, you know what I mean? Like it's kind of like people are going in circles trying to figure out how to support Canadian athletes in general. But I mean, I think that's the biggest thing is if people are watching, people are asking for it, people are excited about it, people are following these athletes, following their journeys. It really just comes down to supporting the athletes. And it could be just something really small, like follow your favorite athlete on social media, send them a high five, whatever it might be. I think it goes a long way and it will actually just, motivate those athletes to keep pushing and keep going forward.
One interesting thing that I noticed in all the research that I did in preparation for our talk today was that there seems to be this weird situation that the pressure of serving your country, of competing, is leading to a lot of mental health issues among sports, and not only just Olympians, but professional sports people as well. And I'd like to see if you could give us your take on that.
Yeah, I mean it definitely is. It's a big issue. It's happening, all over, not only in Canada, but the entire world. Part of it is, the pressure. Part of it is just the demand that goes into being a high performance athlete, the things that you have to juggle to be able to get there. But you know what, I do think that we're trying and we're moving in the right direction in terms of having support. I know in Canada we have something called Game Plan, which just like, resources. I've always been like a big sports psychologist person. Like I've always had a mental performance coach, someone that I can talk to. Always been very close with my team. So I think it's really important to one, have good communication with your team, let them know how you're feeling. Um, there's always that fine line of like, are they pushing you too far or are they just pushing you for you to reach your potential, right? So just knowing kind of like what that area is, and sometimes that comes to coaching, sometimes maybe it's education for those coaches on maybe some of those old school methods don't quite work anymore. So I think you gotta be definitely a little bit more cautious now because people are aware of these things. People are trying to take care of their health, their mental health a lot more. So I think it's just something that's on the forefront, and I think something that we need to take into consideration.
All right, I want to bring back one thing that I did not put in your job description is you're a coach. You were coached by a Romanian great, Adrian Teodorescu, who also coached Lennox Lewis. Did you ever meet Lennox Lewis?
Yeah,
Okay, cool. And so, as a coach, I don't want to peg you and say that are you like the Mickey / Rocky type of coach, or like what kind of coaching today do you feel is effective in sport today? And could you share some success stories, in your coaching career, building the next generation of Canadian sports?
Yeah, I think it really varies athlete to athlete. Everyone has a different way to be motivated. Like I'm one of those people where technique was a big thing for me, which is why, Adrian and I were worked together really well. We had like such an amazing relationship that like literally I would go to the corner in between rounds and he wouldn't even have to talk. He would just give me a look and I knew what he wanted me to do, right? And it's like he didn't have to be in there telling me like go go go. Where some athletes need that, right? So it's really just like taking the time, getting to know those athletes, getting to know like what are their kind of motivators, what do they need out of that kind of coach athlete relationship, and really just working with that. I'm really lucky right now. I work with some of the athletes that I actually used to spar with in the lead up to my preparation for both Olympics. Now they're on their path to the Olympics, which is really cool. So, a lot of times I play more of just like that mental support role. Like one of my athletes was just over in Colombia competing, and right before competition, we watch some fights, some do some video analysis, that kind of thing. But a lot of it really just comes down to like, okay, how are you feeling? What should you be doing? Like, are you visualizing this? Okay, don't overthink it. Like just giving her some like little tips along the way, to just make sure that she can perform at the best of her ability.
Do you feel Canadian boxing is on the rise?
Um, Not quite. I think honestly, we lost a lot over COVID. Many athletes either kind of walked away, retired, or went over to the pro side of things. So we're really on a rebuilding phase. We definitely have some amazing prospects kind of down the pipe, especially on the female side. But across Canada as a whole, we're still really on like a rebuilding phase right now.
All right. So last question. You're a public speaker. You have MandyBujold.com. You speak. What's the essence of people asking you your motivational speaking? What do you focus on? What do you like to talk about in your motivational speaking?
Yeah. Well, a lot of people usually reach out around, when it comes to overcoming obstacles, staying focused through, tough times, goal setting, just a lot of like those transferable skills. For me, I like to share kind of some of my, top 5 high performance, tips that could maybe be translated over into like the business world as well. So yeah, just quite a variety. It really depends on the audience, what they're looking for, and I try to kind of tailor to that. And now I'm actually getting ready. We're getting ready to launch a documentary that'll kind of share some of that story, that people kind of heard little bits about in the lead up to Tokyo, but we're really going to focus on that like Fight Like a Mother campaign against the IOC, and really just share some of those like insights and things that happened throughout that entire process.
Mandy Bujold, this has been a distinct pleasure and honor. I hope to get you back on the show again very soon. For those of you, if you like what you see, please tune in every Friday at 6:30 here on Rogers Brantford TV. Feel free to drop a line. Let us know if we're doing things right or doing things wrong, or are there any other issues that you want us to address. Until then, I wish you a great evening and stay safe.